And Digital India is a project not just for us, for the future generation to have a very useful kickstart or jumpstart. So in that way, all that need to happen is security has to come in the requirement, or rather now it had already started, at least at the design phase, where it becomes an integral part of the entire project. So today, if you look at it, we were talking about this Nigerian fraud, but most of you must be knowing about the ransomware attack that are happening. As far as India is concerned, every hour there are 7 ransomware attacks are happening in India itself. So around 60,000 attacks a year. So people are losing money, or this crypto ransomware, it is making their devices locked, fine? So either we are paying money and getting some kind of remedy, or formatting all the data. So first, there should be some kind of guidelines that need to come into whatever programs that are being coming into. There are 9 pillars defined. So what are the integral security features that need to be in the design stage? How they need to be pursued during the entire life cycle? As we mentioned, implementation is the most critical aspect, how it is going to be there. For Digital India, the most important thing is the connectivity part. Are we looking at some kind of clean pipe, just like clean energy, air without pollution, kind of? How we are trying to look into a clean pipe of connectivity to people so that Digital India is a success. That needs to be looked into. So it's a huge challenge as of now. And all of you are aware of the latest advanced persistent threats, the zero-day vulnerabilities. So what kind of preparedness we have, what kind of plans we have to make sure that this has been provisioned into the design phase itself, so that none of these compromises play an havoc in the plan. That is what is that. It was already mentioned, it is going to be a chaos if security is not considered. So it is a very, very important factor that needs to be at the early stages rather than as an afterthought.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to stand here because it's much better. I think it's a very interesting thought about it should not be an afterthought, but it should be part of the design. And the other thing you mentioned about, we are already in the era of cyber ransom and so on and so forth, and you're dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis, and I think it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse, and if the security is not kept in mind in the whole Digital India, I think, as Dr. Dhande himself mentioned, will lead to chaos. It was surprising that we didn't. The Prime Minister had to leave, but if we had heard him till the end, he says that unless we address security and data privacy, all this is not going to happen. So he himself has mentioned that. So let me come to you, Dr. Vidyasagar. You're looking at it from a control system, from artificial intelligence. You focused on that. Is there, there is a saying, set a thief to catch a thief. Is there a way to use technology to control this, monitor this, catch thieves, set another thief to catch another thief? And how do you see, can we look at, this whole cyber? We are generally, we are reactive. When the event has happened, as you said, we try to, it's detective. We detect something and then react. Is there a way to move from a detect paradigm to a prevent paradigm? And the role of technology, how do you see the situation evolving?
Thank you. Before I answer your question, maybe I can take 2 minutes to share an anecdote, because what Professor Dhande said. So until 2000, I was with the government of India and DRDO, as the person who introduced me mentioned to you. So in 1998, VSNL had a monopoly on internet connectivity. At that point, VSNL was still a government agency, right? So the entire Indian bandwidth to the outside world was 32 megabits per second. That's it, for the whole country. Now, the internet service providers wanted to access the internet directly without going through BSNL, but the security agencies objected, saying that they would not be able to monitor anti-national activities if they permitted direct uplink. So the Department of Telecom set up a committee with 9 people, with me as the chair, and it had the security agencies, RAW, Intelligence Bureau, Home Ministry. It also had the late Devang Mehta, who was the founder of NASCOM, who was representing the industry. So when I was called to head up this committee, and our mandate was to come up with security guidelines to permit direct internet access by private companies. In 1998, this was almost a heretical thought, right? So I remember saying to myself, I think the government is very serious about allowing this to happen, which is why they appointed a 9-person committee. If they didn't want anything to happen, they would have appointed a 30-person committee, right? So anyway, so think of this committee with RAW and Intelligence Bureau on one side, NASCOM on the other side. We actually brought a unanimous report, no dissenting reports, no separate reports, nothing. And we submitted our report in 1999, and that basically threw open the floodgates of internet access. Now you may say, how come we've never heard of you? Well, because in its infinite wisdom, the committee stamped, the government stamped our committee secret. Not just the report, the whole committee. So anyway, so this is my small contribution to India's internet. So, so that's a long time ago, 1999, so it's 17 years ago. So anyway, in terms of setting a thief to catch a thief or technologies, I would say that prevention is almost impossible. Because if you want to prevent crime, you essentially don't connect to the internet, basically. You have to look at the detection of fraud or anomalous activity, let me call it, and you have to segregate different sectors. So for example, a lot of the applications that we're talking about, including some of my fellow panelists, it's much more information retrieval. So people don't have the ability to write information, they can only retrieve information. So the security threat in that scenario is a lot less than in, for example, internet banking. And similarly, when you talk about direct benefit transfers, the government is giving you money, you're not giving money to the government. So security scenario is very different compared to, let us say, e-commerce, internet banking, things of this nature. The scope for fraud is much more because much more bilateral type of transactions, okay? Now, this is nothing to do with Digital India alone. Any internet-based activity has this problem. So the latest trend now is artificial intelligence, which, as Professor Dande mentioned in his initial remark, in the 80s it was a big thing, in the 90s it was dead, now in 2010s it's again come back to life, okay? And ultimately, the difference between, let's say, a simple thing like credit card fraud detection. So you make a payment by credit card on the internet, either it gets approved or it doesn't get approved, okay? It's a binary decision. Whereas with intrusion detection, anomaly detection, it's much more like a gray scale. So you can take some time, so you can say, all right, I'm not quite sure about you, so you can have access to the server into which you have now logged on, but you can't go anymore till I see you a little bit more activity. So the latest techniques, this is passing under data analytics basically, is this kind of a graduated response, pattern recognition, individual profiling. So for example, if I usually log into my bank account at 3 in the afternoon, and suddenly I'm logging in at 9 in the morning, some computer programs, antenna should go up. I mean, computer programs don't have antenna, but you understand what I'm saying. A little alarm should go off saying this is very, very strange behavior. If 90% of my traffic is emails, normally But suddenly one day I seem to be downloading a lot of records from HR, personnel department, antenna should go up. But maybe I was asked by the CEO to download HR, so you can't immediately cut off access. So this whole business of graduated response, and that's the way in which people are doing things. I don't want to give a long lecture about cybersecurity, but basically I would say that machine learning, artificial intelligence is really making a comeback in many arenas, including this one. And last point I want to make is that India has been moving up the value chain in IT. We went from coding to programming to R&D. I frankly do not see any reason why we cannot aspire to be amongst the leaders in this area as well, because this requires a combination of computer proficiency and knowledge of mathematical and algorithmic methods. So with that thought, I'll leave you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And, excellent point of view. So, just to take the discussion further. Yeah, please.
Thanks, Doctor. Actually, catching on his point, I just recall a joke which happened personally in my life, which I would like to share with you, because it will highlight how you should be so careful about the information security and how you should not be overkilling that. One day I was in Hyderabad as an IT head. Suddenly I got a call from my chief security officer in India that there is a fraud which is happening in your Kakinada branch, right? So they are sending some files, okay, of Hutch to the Vodafone headquarters. So I was shocked and surprised how it can happen in Kakinada. Kakinada doesn't have a major branch also, it's having a shop. Then another call came from our global headquarters, Vodafone Global. Chief Security Officer Albert was there, Albert Hitchcock, and his office called me and then said that there is some serious thing is happening. So, and I was given very few minutes to investigate, and it was very, I was shocked because I can even lose my job, right, if you don't take care of this information security. So I went into this thing and then started calling frantically everybody almost. And almost in my office, my CEO, everybody was started looking me as somebody who's not taking care of the security properly. So then I made a call to our Kakinada branch, and I couldn't find anything happening. There were some associate employees and a branch manager. So the investigation did not go any further. And then I sought for that mails, which the so-called the claim that they are making that it is going, information is going. So I had to look at from all angles, right? It's a virus is there, any worm is there, any automatic transmission is there, and all these things. Finally, I said I was not able to get going with that. So I asked that branch, the shop in charge, to sit with its employees and then see if anybody is sending any mail or anything like that. Then he found out that there is one girl, very innocent, poor girl. Actually, she's an associate employee. She does not know much of technology also. She was just appointed in the front desk few months back. She's sending a mail. You know how she's sending? She's sending hi. She's sending a mail to her friend, but she presses tab, and the tab will come to the CC. In CC, she's putting hi, and then she's actually forwarding a sunset photograph, okay, to her friend. Now, when that happens, when you press a send button in a email, the Exchange server will actually search for that hi word in the directory. And there is nobody called hi, so it will find out the first person, and the first person happens to be Albert Hitchcock. His name starts with a, and he is the chief security officer of Vodafone. And this lady, poor lady, suddenly gets a pop-up error, and she presses enter. She doesn't even read that. And then the mail goes away. So that way, this lady is sending a mail to Albert Hitchcock every day. And we didn't know that. And then to add to the problem, the subject of that mail was sunset in Hong Kong. At the time, Hutch was getting handed over to Vodafone, and people were very skeptical about Hutch details going to Vodafone. So they said that Hutch details are going to Vodafone by your office. So then finally I cracked it, and then we were laughing. But then it was a very tense moment. So why I'm saying this is that suddenly a big information, national security can become a very small, innocent thing. So the information security officers have to be very careful to differentiate what is the genuine fraud and what is not, and you will not be given any much time, very few minutes or few hours, and then you have to crack that out. And this requires out-of-the-box thinking. Yeah. And this was possible because I made this guy sit near her and then watch her keystrokes. Then I found out that she's not using mouse, she's using tab key, and then pressing enter. And whatever comes, she presses enter, and then her urgency is to forward something to somebody. Even now also we do, right? When WhatsApp comes, we just forward it without much giving thought to that.
Very, very interesting. And I cannot resist coming back to Dr. Vidyasagar. So, there is a technology issue. He talked about false positives and false negatives. I mean, how can artificial intelligence, do you think that it's possible to build algorithms or other systems to detect and deal with false positives?
Well, this is what I meant by saying that you have to have a graduated response, right? So you always, there's this concept, area under the curve, AUROC, it's called. So ultimately, you have always a trade-off between false positive and false negative. You will never have 0 false positive and 0 false negative, right? So if you think about a credit card transaction, okay, why does the credit card company charge the merchants 2%? Because they don't want to reject a genuine transaction. They don't mind a fairly large number of fraudulent transactions going through, but they don't want false positive because the customer gets irritated, okay? And within reason, this 2% that they charge the merchant more or less covers the cost of fraud, okay? On the other hand, if you're talking about other applications where the cost of a false, and I can give one more example. Say you go through an airline security system and the meter beeper goes up. There also a false positive has almost no consequence because the security person pats you down, you say, okay, you can go. But a false negative has enormous consequences, right? So it's not just that you take one fixed artificial intelligence system and one size fits all. For each application, you have to figure out where on this curve, false positive to false negative, you have to be. And the mathematics does allow you to figure out the optimal point once you specify what is your trade-off between false positives and false negatives. But that varies very, very much from one application to the other. And that is what people like the chief security officer has to figure out, looking at all the things that are running on their business system and have a different threshold for each application. Even within the same bank, even within the same company, all applications are not equally important from this standpoint. Right?
So this is very interesting. Siddesh, let me ask you, as a techie guy, how do you think is there a way for technology to address this false positive, false negative? Because somewhere I think, as Doctor mentioned, that you'll have to have a judgment. You'll have to exercise a judgment. What is in the continuum? Where do you allow and where you don't allow? So somebody will have to say, okay, at this stage, I will allow and not allow. And that has to be coded into the system.
See, I believe technology can do anything today. I think it's about visualizing what rules you want to put up and figure out. And I think there'll always be, this tug of war between fraudsters and how smart you can get. And, you'll keep winning and losing some battles. As an example, when you do internet banking, we have, for example, I get a notification every time there is a transaction of more than 5,000 debited from my account, but I may not get it for every transaction, right? And a friend of mine lost 3.5 lakh rupees overnight because what the fraudsters did was they deducted 500 rupees hundreds of times, whatever. And what they did with 500 rupees was every time they recharge somebody's Vodafone number. Okay? So, I don't know what they do with the money, or maybe just a recharge voucher, or they play a game, right? But by the time this guy got up in the morning, he had no notifications.
Because it was below the
Because it was below the threshold. And yet, there were so many of these transactions done through the night that by the time he woke up, it was all gone. So again, question is you do notifications to prevent hacking. I actually, if I go on a shopping spree on the weekend, after my third charge, I get a call from HDFC saying, sir, your card is being used multiple times, which is a typical hacker behavior, right? If he steals your card, he'll buy multiple times. So they are trying to figure out that, but there are times there are always holes and somebody will come through. Now, but I want to make one more interesting, I just wanted to give an example. Many of you must have at least heard of Pokemon Go if you have not played Pokemon Go, right? It's a sweet little game. It's getting people off their butts and getting them to walk around. Just imagine, and I'm not saying Pokemon Go is doing it, but it is possible that every time you play Pokemon Go, your cameras are on and you're capturing everything that you can see and somebody is collecting it with your location. Now take this one step forward. What I do is I put a very rare Pokemon in the governor's palace, right? Or I put a very rare Pokemon outside the Pune commissioner's office. I put Pokemons along this conference. And without having to take the risk, I enlist hundreds of my followers to capture videos and send it back to me so I can process it. Now, we can talk about this as a terror implication, but there are very simple implications also. Inside Persistent, we don't allow people to take pictures. People are very sensitized to knowing that. But they are not sensitized to the idea that while they are playing Pokemon, they are actually recording video inside the premises.
Correct.
So this is not even something my chief security officer is thinking about because he knows that Siddesh is very careful not to take pictures within the company. But he doesn't realize that while I'm playing Pokemon, I'm involuntarily actually capturing video and pushing it back along with my geolocation. So it's all out there. So I think the point is, yes, you will have a lot of technology, controls that you can put in. And then is there something called over control? Is there, some way to moderate it? I think that is the war we have to fight all the time.
What I wanted to say is two things. One in response to you and one in response to Mr. Bhobe. See, you said, how do you know where to put the trade-off? And the point is, it's not a static decision. You make an initial set point of the trade-off of false positive versus false negative, but you adjust it over time based on experience, okay? So for example, every system has to have a starting point, but that doesn't mean that you stick with that forever. So you keep reviewing it and evolving it. And in terms of this example, I'm actually quite shocked that the bank's internal security system is so poor that it could not detect such an obvious anomaly that a person does not make more than 2 or maximum 3 cash transfers in a given day. And I'm talking about a private individual. We're not talking about a business. Obviously, businesses make hundreds of transfers. So that's the most basic rule a bank should have. On your third transaction, it doesn't matter if it is 2 rupees or 2 lakhs, cut off, and then call. And if the person is not reachable, suppose he's inside a flight, so the contact phone number is switched off, block the transaction. Here's a classic case where the consequence of a false positive is much worse than the consequence of a false negative, right? So, so these kinds of things are actually not that difficult to implement, but you have to keep evolving, right? And let me just repeat a point I mentioned earlier. In addition to this kind of a transactional type of fraud, much more serious is somebody gaining control of one machine and using the access in that machine to gain control of other machines. Now, this kind of a thing, as Mr. Alwar can back me up, I'm sure, you can actually have a graduated response, okay? The example of a banking transaction, a credit card transaction is binary. Either you permit or you don't permit. But things like access control, you can have a graduated response and you say, until I'm really, really sure, I'm not going to allow you to access anything beyond the server on which you are now logged in, even though you seem to have authenticated yourself on one more machine, okay? or I'm not going to allow you to access a certain part of the company's database which you have not accessed previously, even though you seem to have authenticated yourself correctly. So you have time to, maybe it can be a few minutes, it can be a few hours also, sometimes even days. And it doesn't mean that you will get it right. I mean, fraud obviously happens in spite of all of these things. But still, I'm trying to say that even within the security world, there are something that calls for a binary answer and something that can allow you to have a graduated response, okay? Now, for example, I'm sure you've all seen about 2-3 years back, LinkedIn managed to lose the entire database of its users. This is scandalous. How, you must have, and I don't know how many of you people are on LinkedIn, but they managed to lose the entire passwords of every single person on LinkedIn. So that's basically when I stopped using it. It's just, that meant that they did not have this kind of a control in place that once you make a small breach, you are prevented. All you had to make was a small breach, and then the whole company was open to you. That's pathetic.
Yeah.
So stop.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're running out of time. One quick comment and then last one minute.
Yeah,
and
sure, sure. So from my experience, I also see that whenever IT security is has to be taken care of, there is always a budget associated with that. So how much of investment that you will be making into that particular thing. That's very, very important. So when the budget is limited, then you only focus on certain things, and then certain things you leave it out, even though you know that it may be picking up some false negatives also in the due course. You feel that you'll tackle it when it comes to that. So that's very, very important. So when you're making, when you're designing something related to security, you also have to consider that how much of money that is being allocated for buying sensors or putting some things and all. So now the realization is coming with the advent of this big data technology coming. Now we are able to process more amount of data with the cheaper hardware. But till now it was not the case. Oracle databases are very, very costly. So the amount of information that we have to process in a very short time, we will not be throwing a lot of hardware for just to catch one fraud which can happen sometime later. So yeah,
yeah. So excellent.